Week 5 in the NFL is over. A lot just happened. I'm here to tell you exactly what you need to know for the running back position. There were once again some injuries and some running backs who performed extremely well and are available in a lot of fantasy leagues. So in this video, we are talking about the 5 running backs you need to be adding before your friends do in fantasy football. And we're kicking it off with Tyron Tracy, the rookie running back, the 5th round rookie running back for the New York Giants, because we finally got the Tyron Tracy experience we've been waiting for. And we kind of knew this was going to happen because the starting running back ahead of him in Devin Singletary wasn't going to play in this game. You can see right here that he was inactive for week 5. That was official. Now, he was not practicing throughout the week. He got in a limited participation on Friday, but usually the guys who don't practice on Wednesday and Thursday and barely practice on Friday, they're not going to end up playing in that game, and that's what happened here, which opened the door for Tyron Tracy. According to PFF in this game, Tyron Tracy played 45 snaps of a possible 72. Backup Eric Gray, a second-year player, a late-round pick as well, played 26. But in this game, Eric Gray was actually getting usage early on ahead of Tyron Tracy, but then Eric Gray fumbled. Eric Gray fumbled, and Tyron Tracy did not look back, and now I think it's pretty clearly Eric Gray down here and the explosive Tyron Tracy up here, because we got this fantastic performance from Tracy and not the most easy matchup. Like, this was a somewhat difficult matchup against the Seattle Seahawks defensive line. 18 carries, goes for 129 yards. At one point in this game, he had 11 carries for over 100 yards. He ends up averaging over 7 yards per carry, adds a reception, which is something, 1 catch for 1 yard. If he's getting this much usage, this is going to come up because he's a dynamic pass catcher. More on that in a second, a former college wide receiver. And speaking of that pass catching ability, yes, Tyron Tracy did end up playing more in the pass catching situations as well in terms of routes run compared to Eric Gray. We could pull up PFF right here. This number 17 routes run to 12 for Eric Gray. And again, I think that would only get wider if Devin Singletary was to miss another week, which is a possibility. More on that in a second. Now, Tyron Tracy specifically, if you were watching my videos all the way back in April and May, we've been talking about this guy since spring. And yes, I covered the NFL draft and prospects during that time, so you know exactly about them right now, or ideally in the summer before you draft your team. Now, if you're not familiar with Tracy, this guy had an interesting career. You'll see right here, he's almost 25 years old already for a rookie running back. That is old. He comes out of Purdue. Again, that is old for a college or an NFL rookie running back, not for a player. Of course, many of us want to be 25 years old again. But you can see right here, he ends up playing. It's only showing on player profile 4 years here, but he actually played 6 years in college. 6 years in college is not a super senior. That is a super senior, the senior citizens of college. And not only that, if you see right here, this dude wasn't running the ball. In 2018 and 2019, he really didn't play at all. 2020, just 2 carries. 21, 7. 2022, just 17 carries. Why? Because look at this right here. He was a wide receiver his first 5 to 5.5 years of college. You can see the reception totals, 28, 19. But then he ends up going from Iowa for his first 4 years, and then he transfers to Purdue. And once he transferred to Purdue, that's where he became a running back, went away from the wide receiver position. And there's a funny story about this. Tracy was actually recruited originally by Purdue from a head coach that said, hey, I think you should be a running back. Instead, he said, nah, I want to be a wide receiver, and he stayed at Iowa. And then when he went back to Purdue, it was that same exact coach who said, hey, how about you become a running back? And it looks like it's ended up working out, because in his final year of college, 2023 at Purdue, when he finally transitioned, he put on 15 pounds of muscle, became a running back. He had 113 carries, by far a career high, 716 carries. He averaged 6.3 yards per carry, and that led the Big Ten. That led the Big Ten when there's solid running backs like Nick Singleton over there with Penn State, when there's solid running backs at Ohio State. Always, it was Tyron Tracy leading the Big Ten in yards per carry. And then Tracy goes to the NFL Combine as a relative unknown, and he runs a 4.48. He shows elite burst right here according to Player Profiler, and elite agility, which just means he's a fantastic athlete, and he's a fantastic athlete at a solid size. It's not like he's 190 pounds, 180 pounds. He's 209 pounds, basically 210. So this is a solid running back who can handle a 3-down workload with explosiveness, has the size for the red zone, and has the pass catching ability because he was a former wide receiver. If I had to kind of just give you an idea of who he reminds me of, it's a unique player, former wide receiver, but he does remind me running style of Aaron Jones. Now, even when Singletary returns, Singletary is a reliable running back. He doesn't fumble the ball. He can pass protect. He can get you 3.5, 4.5 yards per carry, but he's not going to be this explosive type of player as Tyron Tracy. So I think even when Singletary returns, if that is this week, Tracy can still earn a larger role. And Tracy was earning a larger role heading into this week. He was seeing more routes run, more pass catching usage very quietly over these past 2 weeks, and now obviously I think he's earned even more work. If we look at the injury report from this past week for the New York Giants, you'll see Devin Singletary right here was dealing with a groin injury. On Wednesday, Wednesday, he did not practice. On Thursday, he did not practice. On Friday, he practiced in limited, and he was officially ruled doubtful and then later ruled out. So this practice report, he did get the limited participation on Friday, but again, that is something we've seen in past weeks with guys like Joe Mixon. He practiced in limited on Friday, then practiced the following week, didn't end up playing. It's different for every player, but this is no guarantee that Singletary is going to play in week 6. And the reason why that's important is because the Giants are at home and the offense has looked better, and they didn't even have Malik Nabers this past week, and Daniel Jones played a solid game, and they're going to face the Bengals' soft run defense that allows the 8th most rushing yards per game. From there, they stay at home in a beneficial matchup against the Eagles. Tough matchup against the Steelers, beneficial matchup after that against the Commanders, so Tracy could start again in a great matchup and could be earning a larger workload, with the next month looking pretty solid in terms of his matchups on the ground, offensive versus defensive line. So you should consider adding Tyron Tracy. I think he's a top 5 running back add this week, and then consider and really monitor this next situation. And that situation revolves around this right here. Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins, explosive, electric running back. He left the game with a concussion and did not return to action. And this one, we have to be watching this because it takes on average 8 days for a player to return from a concussion. It's not always the same. We saw 10 days pass and Malik Nabers did not play this past weekend. But the interesting part about this is right here. The next scheduled game for the Dolphins is on the road against the Colts on Sunday, October 20th, which means right now, heading into week 6, the Dolphins do indeed have their bye week. So in theory, Devon Achane should not miss any time. He'll have 2 weeks to recover from this concussion and be back on the field when they come back out of their bye, the Dolphins, in week 7. So overall, odds are that Devon Achane is going to be back and fine, and then we'll only be 1 week away from Tua, who is reportedly, as of right now, not experiencing symptoms and should be back. But that doesn't mean that you should not add Jalen Wright, especially in all 12 team formats, because as of right now, he's the healthiest back in this healthiest back in this backfield. Devon Achane, concussion. Raheem Mostert just came back from an injury, dealing with injuries all year. Jeff Wilson dealing with multiple injuries this year. And the rookie, Jalen Wright, just had a strong performance in week 5. Overall, he was the running back 2 behind the veteran Raheem Mostert. That's what you would expect. According to PFF, there were 78 total snaps. That's this number at the bottom of the screen. 44 of them went to Raheem Mostert, played 60+% of them. But Jalen Wright did see 25 snaps here, which was a season high. And more importantly, it's what he did with these snaps. Because Wright earned 13 carries in this game for 86 yards. He looked explosive. He looked dynamic on these carries. He was on the road against the Patriots, which isn't a tough matchup. It's not the most easy of matchups out there. And he still was able to average over 7 yards per carry in this game, or about 7 yards per carry. I think exactly 6.6 yards per carry if my math is correct. Now, here's what you should know about Jalen Wright if you were not watching our videos back in March, April, you just don't remember when he was a prospect. This is a guy who is out of Tennessee. He's a young running back. He's still just 21 years old, midway through his NFL career, or a quarter of the way through. A young running back out of Tennessee. They got a 4th round pick on him. He goes to Miami where his skill set fits perfectly, but let me just show you right here. He started producing right away as an 18-year-old. An 18-year-old on 85 carries, he ends up putting up over 400 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. From there, he then plays more in his following year, which normally happens for these younger running backs in college. A 19-year-old puts up 875 yards. Last year, he finally breaks out on less carries. He goes for over 1,000 yards, one of the most explosive running backs in college football last year. Now, you might be wondering, why did he never take on a full workload? It was just kind of the way that Tennessee did things. They used multiple backs. They used another guy called Jamari Small. That's why you're only getting these 146, 137 carry seasons. And then you can come over here and you can see, though, one big emphasis for Jalen Wright was adding in a pass catching ability. You could see 6 catches, 2 catches, then 22 catches, a 6% target share. These are all solid numbers, especially for a young college back. And I mentioned earlier that he was one of the most explosive running backs in college. Just check this out right here. Wright led college football in explosive runs of 10+ yards last season. Literally 26% of this guy's runs went for at least 10 yards. And then the fella's stock rose even more because he went to the NFL Combine, and at a decent size, he ends up running a 4.38 40 time, which just made it perfect. He goes there, he's 210 pounds, he's running a 4.3, so he's a super dynamic explosive. There were some concerns about his profile about, he ran into a lot of soft boxes, so of course it's easy to get 10+ yard runs when people are not worried about your running game and worried about your receivers. Which is all fine and well, but if you watch the film, you would know that, maybe he was lacking some vision, but he had that explosiveness and that athleticism to be somebody we had to take seriously entering the NFL. And then it also helped that the dude was just 20 years old coming out of college. He ends up turning 21 right around the time of the NFL draft, and he's one of the youngest running backs to enter the NFL this year. He's explosive, he's dynamic, he doesn't really have a long injury history, and then he lands in the perfect spot with Miami, an offense that has revolved around speed and running backs getting to the outside, and that's what we just saw this past weekend out of Jalen Wright. He is somebody to stash and keep an eye on. You'll probably get him cheap as the Dolphins enter their bye. Now, I get questions every week. But Sal, in your videos and overall, how would you rank these guys? What kind of waiver wire rankings would you do here? Well, luckily, I send out my waiver wire rankings in tiers. These are the tight ends and QBs tier 1 for this week right here. It's already been sent out to over 20,000 other people. The running backs and wide receivers, if I were to scroll over, is there as well. I rank about 20 wide receivers and running backs for waivers every single week, and it's most crucial and important now that the bye weeks are here. 4 more teams on bye as we enter week 6, and you can get access to that blueprint right there, or to that tool when you sign up for my fantasy blueprint. There's a link in the description below, and you get access by just following these 2 simple steps right here. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, it's a one-time payment when you sign up through these instructions and through one of our partners. It's a one-time payment of just $10, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund it. This makes it completely risk-free, as you can see right here. I'll refund it when you sign up through one of our 2 partners. The link in the description below will take you to those. One of them is Underdog right here. Another one is Better, depending on where you live. You can get access to one of these partners here for a one-time payment of $10, risk-free, to get access to all the tools, not just those waiver wire rankings, my trades tool every week, my projections and rankings for that specific week as well, so you know how to start your lineup, game-by-game matchup notes, and a whole lot more. So to get access to my material and my tools that over 20,000 others are currently using, you can scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Again, if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, it's no sweat off your back. You'll get your $10 right back. The next man I want to talk about is somebody who has been trending up every single time he plays a healthy game this year, and it's Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars, because his role just continues to get larger in this offense. As you can see right here, according to PFF, Tank Bigsby comes into this game and he actually plays one more snap than Travis Etienne. Etienne did not get hurt in this game like he did last week in the first quarter, I believe, with a shoulder injury. So this was just legit usage for Bigsby, who sees 23 snaps in this game that ended up leading the backfield. You can come over to his carries. He ends up seeing 13 carries compared to just 6 for Tank Bigsby, 13 out of a possible 19 in this game. So he's seeing over 50% of the backfield carries as well. And the fella turned this into a massive game. As of my recording, this is before Monday Night Football, Tank Bigsby is the #1 running back on the week. Let me say that again. He's not a RB1 in fantasy, which for those of you that know just means that he finishes a top 12 running back this week. No, he's not an RB1. He's the #1 overall RB if we were to scroll through this. And look at some of these names. DeAndre Swift, Kyren Williams is a known name, right? Rico Dotto, all these guys in here. You look right here, you get 14 total touches for Tank Bigsby in this game. Adds a reception for 28 yards, another explosive play for him. More on that in a second. 101 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Yes, it was a nice matchup against the Colts. Yes, moving forward, you should continue to target the Colts running backs now, who have given up over 150 yards to Joe, or the Colts defensive line running backs against them, giving up over 150 yards to guys like Joe Mixon, to guys like Josh Jacobs, and now over 130 total and multiple touchdowns to one Tank Bigsby. And the depressing part of this is when you look at Travis Etienne, he had just 17 rushing yards on 6 carries. Did not look anywhere near as explosive as one Tank Bigsby. Now, heading into this week, Tank Bigsby already led the NFL in breakaway run rate. His percentage of runs that went for 10 plus yards, he had 4 breakaway runs on just 21 total touches. And this past week, he had 2 more breakaway carries, including his long touchdown run. He had 1 breakaway reception, that 28-yard reception. So he's adding 3 more explosive plays to his arsenal in this game alone, which is already more on the season than Travis Etienne has in his entire season. And Tank Bigsby just did it in one game. In one game, he had 3. Now, last week, Travis Etienne, like I mentioned earlier, he did leave for the first quarter and maybe a drive and a half with the shoulder. He was questionable to return, but he did return in that game. So maybe there's a situation where Travis Etienne just isn't right now. He's not right, and that's why we're seeing some more Tank Bigsby. But Tank Bigsby was also injured earlier this year and was producing before that injury and is now producing once again. I think it's probably just because of Tank Bigsby's solid play. Now, to this point in the season, Bigsby has played in 3 healthy games where he's had his normal snaps, not returning from an injury or leaving with an injury, and he's outproduced Etienne in all 3. Look, we got the hype this offseason of Bigsby seeing a larger role, and people laughed at it, probably including myself at one point, because he was legitimately the worst running back in the NFL on a per-touch basis last year in terms of efficiency and fumbling, and now he's #1. But we have to take this serious when a guy is getting 14 touches, more than Travis Etienne. He's trending in the right direction. The coaches are saying the right things. We have to take this serious, and he should not be available right now in over 70% of fantasy leagues. He should, it's crazy. Because this is a guy who could be a league winner. I mean, he's in an offense that has not been good on the season. Trevor Lawrence has not been good, but is finally coming off of a get-right game in a matchup where he should, and the schedule coming up forward is soft for the most part. 210 pounds for a guy, if we go over to his athletic testing according to Player Profiler, has speed for his size. This is 74th percentile speed, has power as well. He's also known these last couple of seasons at least to be somebody who's been working on his pass catching ability, and that kind of showed through this past week. So like I said, the schedule kind of opened us up. It's not going to open up this week when they're going to play a morning game and an on-the-road game overseas against the Bears. Not great overall, but you are going to get a matchup at home after that against the Patriots, solid. Matchup at home against the Packers, solid. Matchup against the Eagles. These are all solid spots, and even I'm fine starting them against the Bears if we're going to get maybe a reception, a target, 2 or 3 in a game, and also goal line opportunities, which we've been seeing lately. So add Tank Bigsby, and then make sure you go out there and get Ty Chandler, because look, we've been saying it all season long. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Aaron Jones when healthy. Aaron Jones this season has been a top 5, if not top 3 running back in fantasy and the NFL when healthy. And for the nearly 30-year-old running back who spent the far majority of his season on the injury report last year, well, last week week he got a little bit banged up, and this week he got banged up again with a hip injury and did not return to the game in London. Now the question becomes, how serious is this hip injury? The Vikings are going into a bye week, so of course that's going to help Aaron Jones. Well, I have no idea, but we do have a doctor, a Harvard-trained surgeon right here, my friend SportsMD Analysis on Twitter, who said Aaron Jones grabbing at his hamstring and ended up being a hip, but maybe there is something else to it. Maybe the original report of hamstring was not correct. Average for that is 2 weeks. Week 6 is their bye week, so he says data slightly favors Aaron Jones missing week 7, returning week 8 with a re-injury risk the rest of the season for an older running back approaching 30. Again, this is assuming that there's some sort of hamstring mechanism in play here, and it's not just a hip. Of course, we don't have that news until maybe by the time you're watching this. If it is some sort of hamstring, I think Ty Chandler's starting at least one game, and if it's a hip, he still has a chance to start a game. Now, here's the important part. Ty Chandler in this game played 46 snaps of a possible 73. Again, the far majority of these were when Aaron Jones left the game. Ty Chandler ended up, I believe, playing over 80% of the snaps after Aaron Jones left the game, and that's after Chandler fumbled as well, so they still trusted to go back to Ty Chandler. Now, if we were to go over to the carries in this game, Chandler ends up seeing 13. Again, Aaron Jones 7, so if we just look at the rest of this, only 4 other running back carries in this game, and a couple of those were on the drive right after Myles Gaskin, came into the game. He saw 2 carries right after the drive where Jones went down and Ty Chandler fumbled. So really, for the most part, you're getting Ty Chandler seeing like 80% of the backfield opportunities once Aaron Jones went down with injury, and this is the type of running back we saw at times last year taking on a large workload because this coaching staff just trusts Ty Chandler. Now, that usage that he had didn't really turn into much. He had 16 touches, which is great usage, just 39 total yards between his rushing and receiving. He had about 5 fantasy points. That's not going to get it done for you. You need more than that. But it wasn't the greatest situation. You have to go on the road. The entire Vikings team has to go on the road to London by situations in terms of for a somewhat younger player, having to adjust to the time zones, being overseas for the first time and being all wonky. You have to face the Jets, whose defensive line has not been great this season, but is also filled with talent. And at the end of the day, it's a 1-game sample where he wasn't expected to be the main runner and didn't have a bunch of scheme snaps with the starters probably in practice this week. Well, it's a 1-game sample. We know what this guy did last year. He was a solid player. I personally believe that Ty Chandler is a must-add now if you don't already have him stashed. Hopefully you do, but he's available in over 80% of leagues. And I think if this role was to stay large, if Aaron Jones was to miss extended time or get re-injured, Ty Chandler's the type of guy who can be a league winner. Because what is a league winner in fantasy? Oftentimes it's a younger running back in a good offense who has the ability to break off big plays, also score touchdowns, but also get involved in the pass catching game. And I believe the 26-year-old out of North Carolina is a guy, a former 5th-round pick for this team, who can do that. He can be a guy in past seasons that we've seen, like Jonathan Taylor, like Isaiah Pacheco, like Miles Sanders, who down the stretch, the final month of the season in fantasy, get you into the playoffs and take you to a fantasy championship. And here's the best part. We already saw him do a glimpse of this literally last year. Literally last year, he saw that Isaiah Pacheco type usage in a maybe watered down situation in Minnesota, but he saw it. Chandler averaged over 5 yards per touch last season, and over the second half of the season, his final 8 games, he had multiple games with 15 or more touches, including this performance against the Bengals in week 15 last year when he ends up starting. Alexander Mattison ruled out. Cam Akers went down with an injury last year for the Vikings. 26 touches, goes over 150 total yards, finds the end zone, puts up 27 fantasy points. Again, at this point in the season, Kirk Cousins wasn't on the team. Everybody was trying to stop the run. And in his one true start last year, in his one and only true start, Ty Chandler pops off for 27.5 fantasy points. I'm not saying the same thing will happen in week 7 if Aaron Jones isn't able to play. I'm just letting you know that this player is talented and has the ability to do it. And now the offense is better with the same solid coach in Kevin O'Connell. So at the end of the day, Aaron Jones is approaching 30. The injury concerns that we were worried about all season long showed their head a little bit in week 4. And this past week, they kept Aaron Jones out of the game. The bye week is coming at the perfect time for him. But again, this is the type of thing that we're talking about every single week now. You can get these running back replacements who can help you for the rest of the season. Maybe Ty Chandler can be the next Jordan Mason in fantasy. So add Ty Chandler in all leagues, and then we have to reevaluate this Jonathan Taylor situation, because originally last week he had an ankle injury. They played it off as not being a big deal. They were calling it a mild high ankle sprain, which all of my high ankle sprains that I know about are instantly 2 to 4 weeks for a running back. We literally just saw that with Joe Mixon. He had a high ankle sprain. Oh, he'll be back next week. He hasn't played now in a month. Well, what do you know? As the week went on, Jonathan Taylor was pretty clear he was not going to play, and then we get an update that he's likely to miss extended time. And according to my friend again, SportsMD Analysis on Twitter, they say Jonathan Taylor data favors him returning maybe in week 6, sometime around week 6 or 7. Week 6 you would see more likely if he was able to practice this week. That's the key right here. Practice this week. Well, last week Jonathan Taylor did not practice at all. I'm not hopeful that he's going to be practicing this week. We'll end up seeing. Hopefully he does, but if he doesn't, we have to talk about this backfield replacement and what just happened in week 5. Because in week 4, once Jonathan Taylor went down, we saw Trey Sermon. He played 25% of the overall snaps, but more importantly, he saw 16% of the rush attempts. He has been the only other running back through the first 4 weeks of the season, including this game when Taylor went down, to see a running back carry for the Colts. So this past week in fantasy, he became a priority add. I was in leagues where he was basically going for $20 to $30, and people thought that he was probably going to be the starter for at least 1 week and now potentially multiple weeks. Now, if you watch watched that video and if you watch Trey Sermon in general, you know that I don't think this guy's all that great. I think he's probably more like a fullback, honestly. The way that he runs, the way that his size is, his speed overall is not great either. But he was going to see a starting role. He's a 215 round running back, so red zone opportunities were to come in play as well. And in this game, that's what we got. We got Trey Sermon playing 41 of a possible 70 snaps. You scroll over to his carries, he ends up seeing 10 carries, 6 targets as well. So the overall opportunities were strong. And it led to a solid day in a fine matchup at Jacksonville, 18 fantasy points. But if you really break this down, 10 carries for 38 yards. He looked brutal. If you watched any of this game, if you're a Colts fan, you know that Trey Sermon looked like a fullback. He looked terrible, but he ends up scoring on a 2-yard touchdown, I believe, in this game. And then you can see right here, this is the big thing. 6 catches on 6 targets. Wasn't even explosive there. Averaging just 4 yards per reception is disgusting for any player, let alone a running back. But those 6 catches on 6 targets aren't going to remain consistent. He had Joe Flacco, who was checking down and in this game throwing 44 times. But in future weeks, and possibly as soon as this week, Anthony Richardson's injury he was almost to play through it this past week. Well, you're going to have Anthony Richardson, who's not going to check down to running backs, who at most will check down to a running back once or twice in the game because he'd rather take off and run. So Sermon isn't a priority ad for me, believe it or not. He wasn't last week. I don't think he is this week. If you want to pick him up in a deeper league of 12 to 14 teams, sure, of course, yeah. If Jonathan Taylor misses again, you can put him in there because this guy did just get 18 fantasy points. But I actually think that we should talk about Tyler Goodson, especially in deeper leagues. This is probably getting closer to your deep bench 12-man leagues or your 14-man leagues. Talk about him if Jonathan Taylor was to miss time, because in this game, even though he only saw 29 snaps, he did see 8 opportunities. And this is a guy in Tyler Goodson who, according to Player Profile, look at this speed, 4.42 speed, solid size, 96% agility, 76 percentile burst. I think this is a solid athlete. He's a great yards per touch player in college, and he just did that again this past week with the Colts. Because if you're just sorting by fantasy points, you're not going to really see the fact that he had a good game. You'll see 8.7 fantasy points, you'll see just 8 touches, but he totals on these 8 touches 57 yards. He's averaging 7 yards per touch in a game where he finally got some more opportunities, and I think that he could see a larger role if Trey Sermon was to be more inefficient. You might be saying, but Sal, isn't Jonathan Taylor coming back in a week or two? Maybe. Joe Mixon with a similar injury hasn't played in a month now. So this one's really shouting out to the deeper leagues where Tyler Goodson is available in over 99% of leagues. This is a guy I think you should be stashing and potentially even flexing depending on your bye week situation. And speaking of a guy you could be flexing depending on bye weeks, this next guy is a veteran that we have to talk about, an interesting situation. But before we get there, over 65% of you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel. We made it to that part of the video. The diehards know it right now. The gentleman's agreement. We're shaking on it through the video. If you made it to this point, you find these videos helpful, entertaining, something about them you think, okay, it's worth watching. Well, if that's the case, pay it forward by just subscribing. Gentleman's agreement. Just hit the subscribe button. Appreciate you a ton. We're going towards 150,000 subscribers. That's thanks to all of you guys. So if you find these videos helpful, hit that subscribe button. It helps a ton. Now, that situation I kind of alluded to is right here. This is an interesting situation. Ramondre Stevenson won't start in week 5, but will play. Everybody took this as Ramondre Stevenson is bench. He's fumbled 4 times in 4 games. He's never going to play again. What is happening here? I think people are just forgetting to read. I know Twitter is just who can get the craziest reaction just to try and make ad revenue, and it's not actually what anybody thinks, right? And then everybody in the comments goes crazy and bots and whatever else. It's a terrible place to be overall. Ramondre Stevenson won't start week 5. He won't start. It doesn't say he's being benched, but will play. It literally tells you right here, the dude's going to play, he's just not going to start. So like a disciplinary action, we saw Keon Coleman not play for the first quarter for the Bills in a couple weeks because he was being late. Not the exact same situation, but basically they're saying, yeah, he's not going to start, which means he won't play the first snap, which maybe means he won't play the first drive, but he actually played on the first drive in this game. Now, at the end of the day, he did see a reduced role. You see 28 snaps for Ramondre Stevenson, 28 for Antonio Gibson. They split the backfield, but you can see here, not in terms of touches, 12 carries, 4 targets for Ramondre Stevenson compared to just 6 carries, 1 target for Antonio Gibson. And for the 3rd time in 5 games, Ramondre Stevenson puts up a top 10 running back finish with 89 rushing yards. He adds 3 receiving yards on 4 catches, just, fake PPR points there, and a touchdown overall. So he puts up 19 fantasy points. So you might be saying, Sal, I can't add Ramondre Stevenson. He's owned in all my leagues. That's what I don't want you to add him. I actually want to talk still about his backfield running back, Antonio Gibson, because Antonio Gibson is not the starter on this team. That's still Ramondre Stevenson, but it is getting closer. And Antonio Gibson is producing through every opportunity he gets. Like, sure, the 6 fantasy points aren't going to stand out. The 7 touches overall aren't going to stand out. But how about the 56 total yards on these 7 touches? How about that? How about his 8 to 9 yards per touch that he had in this game? And he only continues to produce every single time he gets opportunities. And at the end of the day, Ramondre Stevenson did fumble 4 times in his first 4 games. If he was to fumble this upcoming game in week 6, then you could be looking at a situation where he actually is starting to get benched in games. And Antonio Gibson, a former wide receiver who can catch passes, dynamic player who's coming off of a season high in a yards yards per touch last year with the Commanders. This is a guy who I think you need to be stashing still. This past week, a lot of people probably picked him up because they thought Ramondre Stevenson was never going to play again. My guess is a lot of people in your league are going to drop him after this week, so let waivers clear and then go stash him like on Friday. Another potential stash is Kendre Miller. Now, full disclosure, I am recording this before Monday Night Football. Kendre Miller is expected to return, which is great news. You can see right here, if we were to pull this up, Kendre Miller is somebody who was practicing this week, I believe, with a hamstring. He was practicing, a full participant, not on the final injury report. Maybe they didn't take him off the 21-day window. I actually did not check this to be before this game, but he is expected to return, if not this week, then very soon. Kendre Miller is a exciting second-year player dealing with a lot of injuries, but once he's back, I do think he'll have a role in this solid run game offense led by Clint Kubiak. And what makes things even more interesting is the fact that Taysom Hill got injured last week. He's dealing with some sort of ribs, I think fractured ribs injuries. He's not going to be playing in week 5 and then maybe even moving forward. So there's a good chance, since Jamal Williams has done nothing for the Saints, Alvin Kamara is still the clear starter, but you can't keep giving a 30-year-old running back 25 touches a game. He's going to break down. I think you're going to get a Kendre Miller role. He's worth a stash. I also think Cordell Patterson is worth a stash. Yes, he missed this past game with an injury, but just a week before this, you saw Cordell Patterson seeing touches ahead of Najee Harris, was being operating as the #1 running back in week 4 through the first 10 plays of the game or so for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, the box score is not going to look great. He had 8 fantasy points, but overall in this game, 8 touches, went for 62 total yards. He was by far the most explosive running back the Steelers have had this year. Jaylen Warren is still dealing with his knee injury. It's not getting any better as of right now. It might only get even worse news. We'll see. But I think very quietly, a guy who's available in over 97% of fantasy leagues, Cordell Patterson, could be, after another poor game from Najee Harris on the ground and another nice matchup against the Cowboys, you could see Cordell Patterson take on a larger role. And then I'll just throw this one out there. Keaton Mitchell is somebody that I still want to add. I know they have Derrick Henry, the Ravens. I know that they also have one Justice Hill, but why not just pick up Keaton Mitchell and put him in your IR spot? We saw it last year. This guy started the season on IR, and he came out and he started averaging like 8 yards per touch overall before getting injured. Somebody that you should at least put on your put in your IR spot if you have one available, especially in all 12-team formats. This guy should not be available on waivers. If Derrick Henry was to get injured next week, you could see the second coming of Devon Achane in Keaton Mitchell. That's the type of player he is. So these are the running backs that you need to be adding before your friends do this week. And when the wide receiver video is out later in the week, it might already be out depending on when you're watching this, it will pop up right here. I appreciate you all a ton. Gentlemen's agreement, hit that subscribe button before you go, and I'll see you in the next video.